When dealing with GUI development, we're going to do event-driven programming. And what this means is that the GUI is sitting there in front of us waiting for an event to happen. When you go and you click on a button, you are triggering an event to take place. You are triggering some code to start executing when this button is clicked. This is called event-driven programming. You are writing code, you write code, and this code is waiting for something to happen, some event to happen, to occur, so that it starts executing. So, the user is interacting with a page, they click a button. This clicking triggers an event. An event is an object that gets triggered, and this object triggers some code to be run in response to the event being created. And then we see something happen to the GUI, whatever, depending on the button that was clicked. And so the event is the action that takes place within a program when something happens like clicking a button. And when we are writing our GUI applications, what we're going to be doing is creating event listeners. So the event listener is going to be some code that sits there, and it is sitting there listening and waiting on this button to be clicked. So it's an object that is going to be automatically executed when the user clicks this button. So let's see how this all works together. So again, we're going to be implementing an interface. So before we learned that we can write interfaces, like one of the interfaces that we learned to implement was the comparable interface or the comparator interface. And those allowed us to sort objects when they were in arrays or array lists. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have some objects that we are going to implement some listeners. And those listeners are actually interfaces that have methods. And as long as we implement the right method that they are expecting, our code will automatically work. So we're going to be implementing a listener interface on some object, like for example, a button. A button is going to be implementing the interface so that when someone clicks on that button, it will trigger an event to get created. So an event object will get created and will get invoked. And we need to register that event with our listener with the object. So all this is going to make sense when we start putting it into code. So let's just jump into the code on how to do this. So the first thing is when we write a class, we can actually write another class inside of it. So notice here the curly braces are outside. The curly braces here for the private class are inside. This is called an inner class, and we're going to be making use of inner classes when we're writing our event listeners. Now we do need one more import because we imported java.auth.asterisk. There are some classes in a sub package called event, so we need to import that. So the first thing is we're going to go and add that to our code. So I'm going to come here. I imported my other two that we imported before, packages, and now I'm going to import java.auth.event.asterisk. So this is the first thing that we're going to do. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we are going to look at the interface that we need to implement. And for buttons, there's an interface called Action Listener that we need to implement. And the method in this interface that we need to implement is called Action Performed. Just like when we were doing the comparable interface, it told us that you need to write a compare to method. Here it's telling us you need to write an Action Performed method. So this is what we want to do. We want to add a class that implements this Action Listener interface. So how do we do that? Jump into an example. Here I have a class that extends JFrame, and I'm going to create a private class that implements my interface. So I'm going to add a special class just to implement my interface. So let's go and start doing that. And our interface is called Action Listener. So here I have a window that I created. Let me just show it to you before we go ahead. It has two labels, number 1 and number 2, and it has 2 text fields for me to write, and I have 2 buttons. And I want basically if I click add, that it shows me the sum of the 2 numbers. If I click multiply, it's going to show me the product of those 2 numbers. So I created my constructor, I build my panel, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a private inner class, private and class, and let's call it button handler. Okay, and it's going to implement action listener. So this is the interface that we need to implement. Now, once I add that it implements action listener, it's going to give me a red wiggly line, and it says it's not abstract and does not override abstract method action performed. So it wants me to implement the action performed method, which takes an action event. So start writing that. Per, and it takes an action event. Okay. Now, what does this method do? This method is going to get called and invoked when the button is clicked. How do I tell the button that this class is the one that is responsible for taking care of you when you are clicked? I go to my button and I register this action listener with the button. So I go to my button and I let the button know who is responsible for taking care of that button by adding an action listener. So I'm going to go to my button, and I have two buttons here, the add and the multiply. So I'm going to go to my first button and I'm going to say add action listener, and I can just say here new button listener. And I can do that for both of them, but since I'm doing it for both of them, I should probably just create one object. So button listener BL equal to new button listener. And did I call it button listener? Let's double check. Button handler, that's what I called it. Okay, so let's change the name to button handler. I'm creating a new object, and then I can just make sure that this object is the one that's registered as the action listener, and I'm going to do that for both buttons. And what doesn't it like? Let's see. B1 is not. Oh. So now what I did was I added a class that's implementing the action listener, and I went to my button and I told my button, this is the class that's responsible for you. Okay, so I created that and I told the button that this is the class that is responsible for you. So this is register the class that implements the action listener interface. And let's just do this. All it's going to do is just going to print a message, and you know, this is not how we should be doing things, printing messages, but this is just for debugging. And I'm going to just say button clicked, just to see what's happening. So when I launch the code, I have my GUI. If I click on any of these buttons, I click on add, it says button clicked. I click on multiply, it says button clicked. So that means when the button got clicked, the action listener that was registered with the button got invoked, and the action performed method is the one that's getting invoked. So we can write code here to handle and do what we want to happen when this button is clicked. Now, which button was clicked? We have here two buttons that are registered. And the way to know what button was clicked is using this action event object that is given to us. Now, this action event object has two methods that are useful. It has get source and it has get action command. I'm going to show you how to use both of them. Get source will actually get you the object, give you back a reference to the object that generated this event. It will actually give us back the button that got clicked. So here, I want to kind of see, was it button 1 or button 2? Well, I want to check if it's button 1 or button 2. So I kind of want to see, you know, I'm going to see which button got clicked. So I'm going to say button, for example, equal to e dot get source. And get source returns an object. So I know that it must have been a button because I only registered on the button. So I'm going to cast it to a J button. And I want to see which one it is. Well, I basically want to see if button, I can use equals or equal because it's returning the reference, it's returning the address of my button. And I want to see if it's button 1, if it's the add button. And I'm going to say, for example, system.out.println add. Okay. I'm going to print out, and this is again for debugging purposes. We're using this printing, but in the real application, we're not going to use it. But here, how do I get access to button 1? Because button 1 was created inside the build panel method. Well, to get access to it, we really need to move it out so it's global and everyone can use it. So instead of creating the button here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just initialize it in here. So I'm going to do this for JButton1 and JButton2. So they are initialized here and they're created here, but the actual reference to them is going to be up at the top so that I can access them in my inner private class. So now I'm going to go to the button that the event is giving me back. So we said an event gets created when the button is clicked. This object is given back to me and I can access information from that event. One of the things that I can access is the source of the event. What got clicked? So get source gives me what got clicked, what button got clicked. And so here, when I run this code now, and I click on the add button, it tells me that the add was clicked. Otherwise, it'll tell me that the multiply was clicked. So I can determine which button got clicked. Now here, I don't want to be printing add, I want to actually add the two numbers. Instead of printing add, I can leave this in for debugging purpose, but the main purpose of this program is to add those two numbers. So I need to get the numbers that are in those two text fields. And again, those two text fields, they're created inside JPanel, inside the build panel method, so I'm not able to access them. But if I create them outside, then I'll be able to access them. So again, I'm going to initialize them in here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create the objects outside so I can access them. So I'm going to start moving things out from my build panel so that they can be accessed by my inner class. Okay, so now in here, what I need to do is I need to get those two text boxes. So I can go to the first one, let's say S1. So to go to text 1. And it has a method called getText, which is going to give me the text that is inside the box. Now, what I really want to do is I want to parse it into a number. So I'm going to say integer, int n1. I'm going to say integer parse int, and I'm going to convert it to a number. So I'm going to the text field, getting the text that is in there, which is a string, and converting it to a number. And I'm going to do the same with the second one. Go to the second text field and get its content. And then I'm going to pop up a JOption pane dot show message dialog, which we learned before. And I'm going to just show the sum. So I'm just going to say n1 plus n2. Okay, and I'm going to repeat that again in my else. Except this time I'm going to do the multiplication. I'm going to copy and paste that over here. And this time I'm going to print the multiplication. Okay, so let's give it a try and see if it gives us the right answer. So here, if I say 10 and 20, I add them. It pops up a message that says it's 30. And if I multiply them, it pops up a message that says it is 200. So I was able to get those buttons to work by implementing an action listener, and registering it with the buttons, and then using the getSource method to determine what was clicked. So that is one way we can do it. The other way is to get an action command. The getAction command gives me back the string that was on the object that was clicked. So those buttons that were clicked had the words add and multiply on them. So instead of using getSource, what I can do is getAction command. get the action command. So let's do that. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to say string command equal, and I'm going to go to my event, my action event that's passed in, and I'm going to say get action command. And just to test it out, I'm going to print that out just to see what it says. Okay, so I want to test what the command that's given here. Okay, and let's try it out. When I click add, it tells me that the add, this is the text that's on the button. When I click multiply, it's telling me multiply. So based on that text, I can determine what I want. So now, instead of coming and saying, checking what the button is, I'm going to check what the command is. If I want to say if the command equals the word add, then I want to do the adding. And so I'm just going to copy this adding code and put it here. And since this is the only thing that I only have add and multiply, I'm not going to do an extra check for multiply. I'm just going to assume that it's multiply. And I'm going to put it here. Let's test that and see if it works. So let's again put our numbers 10 and 20. I click on add, it says 30. And if I click on multiply, it says 200. So it's showing me what was what the correct answer based on the command. Now, let's go and come to this button. And if I said here, instead of add, I made it add with 2 Ds, now it's going to be broken because it's going to check to see if the button that's clicked is add. And when I do it, it shows me 200 because it didn't fit the ADD. So what you really want to do is not, hard code a string here and hard code it at the bottom, because if you change it in one place, you might forget to change it in another place. So this should become a static string at the top somewhere. So let's make it string add, and this should be string multiply. String multiply. Let's add them, define them at the top as final strings that no one can change. Final string add equal to add, and string multiply to have the word multiply in it. And so in my action handler, instead of hard coding again add, I can just reference that string. So now that string is defined only once. And if the text, if I want to change the text, I can change it as I please. So here, if I say 10 and 20 and click on add, it still gives me 30. If I decide I don't want it to be the word add, I want it to be like, let's say, add numbers, I only have to change it in one place. And then the button gets modified. The text for the button is getting modified over here, and the action listener will pick it up also. Okay, it still shows me 30. I don't have to change it in more than one place. So this was how to use the get action command. This is another example in the slides that you can look over for reference. So for this classwork, what you're going to do is you're going to take your 17.1 classwork that you've implemented, and you're going to actually write the code to get the two buttons convert to miles and convert to kilometers to actually work. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to add a label that has the answer in it. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So here in NetBeans, what I did was I popped up JOption pane. But what I could have also done is here in my panel, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a label for the answer. I'm going to just say JLabel answer equal new JLabel. And right now it has nothing in it. Actually, let's create it at the top. So I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to just put empty spaces in it right now, just so that I know that there is room for it. And I'm going to go and add it to the end of my panel. So panel.add answer. And let's put it all the way at the top. Let's create it here. Now, when I go to my code, instead of popping up a JOption pane, what I'm going to do is I'm going to populate that label. So I'm going to say answer. And just like when I wanted to get the text of something I said, get text, I can also say set text. So I can set the text for it to be the answer. So I can make it N1 plus N2. But N1 plus N2 is a string, so it's not going to let me. So I need to create a new string out of it. And I can say I can use string like value of, for example, where you give it a number and it gives you back the string. So we could use the value of to do that, to convert that number to a string. And I'm just going to do the same here for my multiplication so we can test it out. And here we need the multiplication. So let's give it a test. So here let's put 10 and 20. And if I say add nums, there's the answer. If I say multiply, there's the answer. Now, we're going to later learn how to put things in right places so that they look better. But basically, it's coming up over here. So that's what you're going to be doing in this classwork. You are going to be adding a label that actually changes the value of based on the answer.